other, the only case is Raphael Brown. I'm not sure if Cox has anything other than Raphael Brown.
Officer Cox, do you have any other case here today?
No, sir.
Then, Mr. Cox, you're free to go. Have a good day.
Thank you, sir. You as well.
Okay.
My device is unable to access the camera.
Oh boy.
Yeah. That's we're gonna have to work through that, Officer Crowder. Are you on a cell phone or laptop?
I'm on a phone, sir.
And your phone does not have a camera?
That camera is damaged. The only camera that works is the back camera.
Is it possible for you to have the back camera on?
I could give it a try. Give me a second.
Okay.
Does that work, sir?
Yes, it does. And we'll do this as best we can to the extent that you are on camera and you've identified yourself. If at some point there's a technical issue, it will be my intent to continue with the hearing with audio. And I know that there may be issues or concerns, but you've identified yourself and I've seen you. And so I'm not going to allow a technical issue to stop from moving this matter forward. So we're back. This is August 29th, 2022. This preliminary hearing calendar. My name is Brad Gardner. I'm the presiding judge over this hearing. We have two individuals, State of Georgia versus Michael Dwayne Hollins Jr. Mr. Hollins is charged in warrant number 2022 WA 11940 with committing the offense of false imprisonment. He's also charged in warrant number 2022 WA 11941 with committing the offense of battery. And he's charged in warrant number 2020. I'm sorry, that's a different person. Those are the two charges against Mr. Hollins. Mr. Hollins is present here in court and he's being represented by Mr. Brandon Lewis. We also have Andre Turner, who is charged as a co-defendant in this case. And he's charged in warrant number 2022 WA 11942 with committing the offense of false imprisonment. Mr. Turner is represented by Attorney Hill. She's also here present in court. And from the jail side, I only see one individual. Can we bring both in to the camera? Okay, thank you. State is represented here by attorney or district attorney Mosley. Would you call your witness and swear your witness in and present your case?
Yes, sir. Investigator Crowder, would you raise your right hand, sir? Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give in this hearing with the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Would you identify yourself for the record?
Investigator Crowder with the Sheriff's Office.
And sir, were you so employed on July 29, 2022?
Yes, ma'am.
At approximately about 9:50 in the evening, were you dispatched to the jail?
No, yes, ma'am.
And is that located here in Clayton County?
Yes, ma'am.
What pod, or I don't know how the housing units, how you divide them up. I think you call them pods. Which pod were you dispatched to or asked to come down to?
I believe it was 5. If I
Okay.
was not,
You don't recall? Okay.
what?
But what was the nature of the call, sir, that you were dispatched or to come down for, sir?
An assault on an inmate.
And sir, when you got there,
Go to your mother. I'm
Are
sorry,
there-
go ahead.
I'm sorry. Okay. Are there cameras in the pods or the area where the inmates are housed?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you review an incident on that day, sir?
Yes, ma'am.
And could you tell his honor what you saw on the videotape that day, sir?
I witnessed the victim and both of the co-defendants escorting the victim into the cell, then being in the cell for an extended period of time. A couple of people coming in there, observing what was going on inside the cell. And after a period of time, both of them walking out of the cell, and then shortly after they walked out, the victim walking out of the cell.
And let me ask you, you said 2 co-defendants. Are they present today?
Yes,
Sir?
ma'am.
And could you just quickly identify to the best of your ability the 2 people we're speaking of?
Give me 1 second. That would be Mr. Andre Lamont Turner and also Mr. Michael Dwayne Hollis Jr.
And do you see them anywhere on this Zoom? Those 2.
I saw them briefly on the camera.
Okay. So the 2 individuals there, Your Honor, elective record reflect he's identified both of them. Did you have an opportunity to speak to, well, what is the victim's name, sir?
I do not have the victim's name with me at this time.
Okay. Did you have an opportunity to speak to the victim?
Yes, ma'am.
And what did the victim tell you happened?
The victim told me that he was essentially, as I said before, escorted into the cell against his will and beat up by one of them. I believe it was Mr. Hollins was the one that actually got into the altercation with him. Mr. Turner was just essentially escorting him and pushing him inside the cell. And, while he was in there, he was, he stated that he submitted to Mr. Hollins, and Hollins continued to attack him after he submitted to him. And he continued to beat on him for multiple minutes after that.
Now, did you make a report in this matter, sir?
Yes, ma'am.
If looking at your report, would that help refresh your memory as to the victim's name?
Yes, ma'am.
Would you quickly just look at your report and let me know when you've refreshed your memory as to the victim's name?
I do not have access to that report at this time.
You don't have access to that report? Okay.
No.
if I send you, Your Honor, I'd ask the pause to be able to scan and send him a copy of his report for the victim, unless the defense attorneys would like to, we could stipulate that the victim's name in this matter to move it on.
I have no objection.
No objection.
Your Honor, the victim's name in this matter is Mr. McFarland, sir. That's who we're speaking of, Quinn Jamal McFarland.
So noted.
Thank you, sir. Now, Investigator Crowder, when you spoke to did you speak to Mr. McFarland after viewing the videotape?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you see any injuries about the physical person of Mr. McFarland, sir?
Yes, ma'am.
What did you observe, sir?
I
As far as
observed,
his physical injuries.
I observed the left side of his face being swollen. And that was the only visible injury that he had.
And did Mr. McFarland at any time indicate if he knew of a reason why the two defendants pushed him into the cell and one defendant attacked him?
He did.
What was the reason, sir, he gave you? Do you recall?
Actually, I'm not going to speak on that because I don't actually recall 100% what he said.
Okay. All right. And do you recall if, to the best of your recollection, if the victim indicated if they belonged to any organization, the two defendants?
He did.
And this organization would be something that we normally call a street gang?
He did.
Do you recall the sect or the name of the street gang that he said these two belonged to, sir? To the best of your recollection, if you can recall.
He didn't identify a set. He just simply told me that they were a part of the Bloods, but he did not. Another witness told me what set they were a part of.
And do you recall what the other witness, what sect the other witness told you they were a part of, sir?
I believe it was the 5L set of the Bloods.
Thank you, sir. And so I just want to make sure, because I don't want to put charges on somebody that don't deserve charges, that the victim told you it was Mr. Hollins that was battering and pushed him into the cell. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And that the other individual, Mr. Turner, just helped push him into the cell, if I got this correct.
Yes, ma'am.
And he indicated that Mr. Turner never physically hit him or kick him or anything of that nature. It was
Yes,
only
ma'am.
Hollins. Okay. No further questions of this witness, Your Honor.
Okay, I'm going to start with Mr. Lewis. You're representing Mr. Hollins, and then Ms. Hill. So go ahead, Mr. Lewis.
Thank you, Judge. Investigator Crowder, are you considered to be the lead investigator on this case?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And I understand that you don't have your police report in front of you. Are you able to tell me from looking at the screen which individual is Mr. Hollins and which individual is Mr. Turner? Do you know?
Yes, sir. I'll be able to.
Okay. And tell me which one is Mr. If you could describe what Mr. Hollins, they're obviously wearing the same thing, but can you tell me which one is Mr. Hollins and which one is Mr. Turner?
If you could give me 1 second to look at the jail camera, I'll be able to tell you right now.
Yes, sir.
I'm having difficulty being able to do that. I know that if they speak, I'll be able to see their camera briefly.
Okay, well, I'm not gonna ask them to speak. If you cannot identify them, I understand that. Is it safe to say at this point that you're unable to identify which person is Mr. Turner and which person is Mr. Hollins? Is that correct?
I'm able to identify. I can see the camera now. I believe Mr. Turner is going to be the male to my right.
Your Honor, it might be easier if you could just describe like their hairstyles. Which
Uh,
one is Hollins and which, because it's hard right and left.
The dreadheaded individual.
I'm sorry, investigator. I didn't understand your response, investigator Crowder.
Going with the longer hair.
That is, to your knowledge, that's whom?
That's Mr. Turner.
Okay, thank
So
you.
you've identified the individual with the longer hair as Mr. Turner, correct?
At this time, I believe so, yes.
Okay. Now, you watched the video. Approximately how long ago did you watch the video, sir?
I believe this case was less than a month and a half ago.
Okay. And if you can estimate approximately how long is the video in its entirety from, and I'm talking about the relevant portions of the video, how long are the relevant portions of the video in totality?
The relevant portions of the video, in my estimation, are from them walking into the cell to them walking out of the cell. What happened when they walked out of the cell? I would say it was roughly about 4 minutes in total of relevant video.
Okay. And so I think you've indicated that the video shows the two co-defendants as well as the alleged victim walking into the cell. When you see them walking into the cell, does either Mr. Turner or Mr. Hollins, do they have their hand on the individual?
One of them did physically push them inside,
Okay.
and stated that the other one kept him inside.
All right. So as they are walking to the cell, is his hand on either one of the co-defendants? Is their hand on the alleged victim?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Are you indicating that they grabbed him?
I'm indicating that he was trying to walk away from them and go in a different direction, and he was being pushed inside the cell by one of the defendants.
All right. And can you identify which individual would have pushed him into the cell?
That would have been Turner.
Okay. So it would not have been Mr. Hollins that actually physically pushed the individual into the cell. Is that correct?
No, sir.
All right. Now, once the door is closed, you cannot see what is going on inside. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Everything that you know about what allegedly took place inside would have come from the victim's testimony. Is that also correct?
It also would come from their testimony. Mr. Hollins, if I'm remembering correctly, based off my report, he did actually admit to fighting him while he was inside.
All right. Now, Mr. Hollins indicated to you that he fought him. Did Mr. Hollins indicate to you a reason why they were fighting?
I wouldn't be able to answer that. I don't remember off the top of my head the exact statements on that in particular.
Do you remember if he indicated that it appeared to be more of a mutual combat situation as opposed to a false imprisonment from Mr. Hollins' perspective?
I wouldn't be able to say that. I don't recall.
Did the victim indicate to you that this was gang, that the motive behind this had to do with them being in a blood set?
No, sir.
Okay. So when there was testimony about the fact that they were in a blood gang and whatever the set was, that is irrelevant to the actual charges. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Right. They were not charged with participation in gang activity, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Did it appears that you've spoken with Mr. Hollins? Did Mr. Turner also give you a statement?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And what did Mr. Turner indicate happened?
Mr. Turner, Mr. Turner essentially said that he walked in there with him, witnessed the fight, and walked out. That was pretty much the extent of what he described happened.
Did Mr. Hollins indicate that he forced the individual into the cell?
No, sir.
Okay. What did he indicate, if you can remember, as to how they actually arrived into the cell?
Based off of their statements, I don't remember exactly what he told me as far as that goes. Same with the mutual combat. I'll just going based off of my memory. I don't recall whether he said, "Hey, this was mutual," so on and so forth.
Okay. And whose cell was this?
I don't actually have that information.
Is it possible that the actual cell belonged to either the victim, Mr. Turner, or Mr. Hollins? Is that possible?
That was not a part of my line of question at the time.
Okay. When the way that this particular cell works, once you actually enter the cell, are you able to leave the cell, or is the cell then locked behind you?
The cell, this particular cell block, going after off of memory, the cells are actually rigged. So that's how they were able to gain access into the cell and gain access outside of the cell, is because they have the ability to freely move in and out of that particular cell.
Okay. Well, I guess my question is, do you have any evidence that the cell was in fact rigged open or rigged closed so that someone could not either enter or exit the cell?
They were, the only evidence that we have is the fact that they were able to go in, close it, then open it without any permission from the officer on duty in that cell. In that tower.
All right. And does it appear from the video that it was rigged open?
Based off of the fact that they were able to go in and out of it, I believe that it was rigged.
I'm asking you from the video, from looking at the video, does it appear as if they are rigging it open?
It appears that, yes, they're rigging it open.
How so, sir?
They were able to open a door that would otherwise be locked.
Well, how do you rig the door open?
You simply ball up a lob of paper to where it can actually fully connect with the other side of the door, or you put a piece of plastic in there. Basically, anything that would interfere with that process is able to rig that door. And that's how doors are in that particular housing unit.
And are you indicating under oath that you see in the video a piece of plastic, a piece of paper, something that is used to obstruct in order to rig the door open? Is that what you see in the video?
I do not see them putting any plastic or anything in the door on the video.
Okay. Judge, I have no further questions.
Okay, based upon that line of question, I have one question for Investigator Crowder before we go to Ms. Hill. Was there an attempt to look at the door to see if in fact the door was rigged?
There was no attempt to look at the door because we knew that it was rigged based off of their ability to access it.
Okay, I'm not going to ask any further questions on that line. Ms. Hill, go ahead.
Thank you, Judge. Investigator Crowder, when you spoke with Mr. McFarland, did Mr. McFarland indicate that Mr. Turner made any verbal threats of violence towards him?
Violent. I wouldn't be able to remember that. I don't remember that specific line of question.
Okay. And let me ask you, so you watched the video, was there any audio on the video?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Let's see. So Could you see clearly where Mr. Turner was standing during the altercation in the video? Was he standing inside or outside of the cell?
Inside the
Okay, the entire time he was standing inside the cell?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and just to be clear, was the door open during the fight?
The door was open with a guard outside.
I'm sorry, your audio is going out.
I said the door was closed for a period of time with an inmate guarding the outside of the door.
Is it just me or is just audio breaking up?
No, it is breaking up. Investigator Crowder, to me, it sounded like you said that the door was closed at some point, but then someone was standing out in front of the door at some point. Is that an accurate description of your testimony?
Yes, sir. I said the door was closed for an extended period of time, and there was a inmate guarding the outside of the door.
Okay.
Who's guarding the outside door?
I do not have the report in front of me, but that's one of the people listed in the report is one of those individuals that was guarding the outside of the door.
But neither of the two defendants here today?
No, sir. I mean, no, ma'am. I apologize.
Okay. So did you see who closed the door?
No, ma'am.
Okay. All right. Did Mr. McFarland make any statements pertaining that he wanted to leave? No, did Mr. McFarland make any statements pertaining to Mr. Turner that he wanted to leave and that Mr. Turner was stopping him from leaving?
Based off of my memory of his statements, he did indicate that he no longer wanted to engage, that he wanted to leave, and that he was not going to come out.
You're breaking up again, Investigator Crowder. Could you repeat that?
I said, going based off of memory, one of the statements that the victim did make is that he did submit to him at a point in time, and he did disallow him from leaving at that point.
Who disallowed him from leaving?
That would be Mr. Collins.
Okay.
It sounded like the answer was Mr. Hollins. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
So is it your testimony today that Mr. Turner did nothing more than stand in the cell during the fight?
During the fight, yes, but he was the one who
Could you repeat that, Investigator Crowder?
I said while he was inside of the cell, it is my testimony that he did not participate, but he did originally push him into the cell, which led me to charge him with the original charge.
You say he pushed him into the cell. Where were they when he was pushed into the cell?
The three of them were walking towards the cell, and he was pushing him into the cell as the victim had his back towards the cell, essentially with his hands up saying like, "Hey, what are you doing? What's going on?" Or at least that's what it looked like from the camera. So the way that it's set up is the tables are towards the door, exiting the housing unit, and the cells are in the opposite direction. So he was pushing them towards the cell, and it was the cell to the back far right of the housing unit.
So again, you said that he submitted, I guess, once in the cell. Mr. McFarland, did he not attempt to run out? Did he not attempt to walk away? I mean, was there any dragging and pushing?
But he was, at least from what he told me, he was on the ground continuing to be hit. So he kind of balled up at some point.
I'm speaking of prior to going into the cell. Did they drag him into the cell? Did they pull him into the cell?
Just from the video, based off the video, he was on the foot.
Say that one more time. You broke up at the end.
I said based off the video, he was only being pushed.
So he was pushed once into the cell. Okay.
A couple, 2 or 3 times.
All right. No further questions, Your Honor?
Any redirect?
No, Your Honor, not from the state, sir.
Okay. Is there any other witness the state's going to call?
No, sir.
Mr. Lewis, do you have the intention of calling any witnesses?
No, Your Honor, just brief argument.
Ms. Hill, do you have the intention of calling any witnesses?
No, Your Honor, just argument.
Okay. Ms. Mosley, you can make your argument now, or you can wait to argue later, but I'll leave it up to you.
I'll waive opening and reserve. Closing.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Lewis?
Thank you, Judge. I'll be brief. Judge, the first issue that the state has to overcome is the identification of the defendant, which is required at every preliminary hearing, that the defendant be properly identified as the perpetrator of the crime. In this particular case, Investigator Crowder has identified the individual with the longer hair as Mr. Turner. And the individual with the longer hair is in fact Mr. Hollins. And so the identification of Mr. Hollins as well as Mr. Turner has not been properly, they've both not been properly identified by the state's witness. Certainly Investigator Crowder, his memory could have been refreshed on that particular issue, either by the video itself or the description of the defendants as it pertained as it came from the actual witness itself. So Judge, we would ask that it be dismissed on that particular ground. If the court believes that in fact they have been properly identified, then there's still the issue of whether this is in fact a false imprisonment. Keep in mind, Judge, they're in a jail, so they cannot leave. All 3 of them can't leave. And so the issue is them walking towards a cell. And I believe Investigator Crowder, I think he actually went back and forth on this. I believe that initially said Mr. Hollins pushed him in. And I think on cross-examination from Ms. Hill, he then said that it was the other co-defendant that actually pushed him into the cell. Is that in fact the pushing into the cell a false imprisonment? And I would suggest that walking and pushing someone is not a false imprisonment. And I believe what Investigator Crowder then sort of alluded to was that the false imprisonment did not come from approaching the cell and entering the cell, but the false imprisonment would have come from the fact that while they were engaged in this altercation, that the victim submitted. And I believe what Investigator Crowder indicated was that they were in the process of fighting, he submitted, and then Mr. Hollins then continued to beat on him. That also is not a false imprisonment. He did not stop him from leaving. He did not confine him into the cell. They were if you believe all the evidence as it's presented in a light most favorable to the state, they went into the cell, got into a fight, and when the person was losing the fight, the other individual continued fighting him. That might be a simple battery, but that is not a false imprisonment. And Judge, I would ask the court to also take into consideration how Investigator Crowder describes the incident as they are going into the cell, because these are cells in a jail that have to, in order for them to be open, they either have to be open by the people that work there or they have to be rigged open. And that Investigator Crowder does not describe any act that would suggest that this is from the video itself, that would suggest that it had to be rigged open, which would take some amount of time in order to do. And so these 3 individuals went into this cell probably to have a fight, to resolve whatever issue that they resolved. And in the process of doing that, one person lost that fight. That, Judge, is not a false imprisonment. I would also suggest that that neither one of the defendants were properly identified. And as such, Judge, I would ask this case be dismissed.
I'm gonna address the identification issue first. As I heard the evidence and the testimony coming in, there was an investigation that took place where these two individuals were identified. I would have loved for Investigator Crowder to have reviewed his report or have the report present so that these questions can be answered at this stage. But I do find that the identification issue is not a problem at this stage. The false imprisonment is something that is also an interesting argument as it relates to the jail. And I believe it's Mr. Tolles that raised the question of how can you falsely imprison someone who's already in prison? While I believe that is an interesting argument to make, and probably one day it needs to go up to appellate courts to have that issue answered, you can restrain someone from moving in a small space. So that right now is how I come down on that issue, is when I hear the testimony, somebody's getting pushed in a cell or held in a cell or whatever, I believe that fits under the law as it relates to false imprisonment. And doesn't matter whether I agree with it or not, I think it fits under the law. So I'm going to bind these two. I'm sorry.
I haven't made argument.
No, I'm dealing with Mr. Hollins.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm gonna get to you, Miss Hill, for Mr. Turner. So I'm gonna bind these two charges over for Mr. Hollins for the reasons that I stated. And Mr. Lewis, I would, if your client is convicted, I would say that you should appeal and see what the appellate courts have to say about it. But right now, I don't have anything that I can point to as a judge to say that I should do something different. Ms. Hill, let me hear your argument.
Thank you, Judge. Investigator Crowder so eloquently said so many times that Mr. McFarland was escorted to the cell and then submitted while in the cell. He stated many times that Mr. McFarland did not say that anyone made any verbal threats to him. Specifically, Mr. Turner made no verbal threats to him. He basically stood there and watched the fight and did nothing to keep him inside of the cell, made no threats that he could not leave the cell. So for that reason, Your Honor, a push in the hallway prior to entering the cell at best should have been a simple battery. But certainly, I don't think it would constitute false imprisonment because he wasn't preventing him from leaving a small enclosed space. It was, I guess, in the main hallway area where he was pushed. Doesn't say that he made an attempt to leave. He didn't say he wanted to leave to Mr. Turner. It wasn't Mr. Turner's responsibility to find a way for him to leave. And he made no threats to tell Mr. McFarland that he could not, in fact, leave. So for that reason, Your Honor, I ask that you dismiss the false imprisonment charge against Mr. Turner.
Okay, I'll hear from the state before I respond to that, Ms. Hill.
Thank you, Your Honor. Just real quickly on dealing with Mr. Turner, the reason why I asked the officers about the gang affiliation is because of this matter. Granted, Mr. Turner did not beat down the victim, but he stood inside, from the investigator's testimony, he stood inside that jail cell. And we all know that jail cells are small jail cells, and allowed his brother, the co-defendant in the same gang sec, to beat down this victim while he stood there. So, and he was the one, if I remember the investigator's testimony correctly, he was the one that was pushing the victim, as he said, the victim's had up his hand like, whoa, you know, hey, what's going on? He was pushing the victim towards the open door of the jail cell. And then there was somebody else that was standing outside, ensuring that nobody else got inside while this beatdown was taking place. So in the fact that the defendant was pushing this victim into the cell and then stood there inside the cell, preventing this victim, if he was able to finally get up from the beatdown and get out, he was blocking his way. So he did falsely imprison this victim in that cell to allow the co-defendant, Mr. Hollins, to beat him down, sir. So we ask that you bind Mr. Turner over too, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I'm going to bind Mr. Turner over also. Attorney Hill, the testimony as I heard it leads me to there being a party to a crime theory that's there. Of course, state has to prove whatever they have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt at trial, but there's evidence that they acted in concert, and so I'm going to bind that over too. So both of these cases are going to get bound over to the Superior Court of Clayton County. Mr. Hollins and Mr. Turner can be returned. Investigator Crowder, if you don't have any other case here, you are free to go, sir. And let's find out what's the next case.
Judge, might be excused.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
It was great to see you, Mr. Lewis. Have a good day.
Judge.
Thank you,
Your Honor,
Judge.
may I just take a brief bathroom break, sir?
Yes.
Thank you, sir.
We're gonna stand in recess until, I'll say 12:15.
Well, Your Honor, may
Yes.
I be placed in the jail then while we're taking a recess?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
May I also be placed in the jail?
Yes.
And Judge, whenever you are back from recess, we'll be ready to proceed on
Irving.
Judge, this is Stan Schoolcraft.
We're still live on YouTube, Judge.
On